Recently, I have noticed that some of the most vocal, some of the most passionate Trump supporters have been from Hong Kong. And I'll get a bit more into that in a minute. But regarding Donald Trump, he's kind of like a bad smell that won't go away. Just for the record, I've already spoken about this, but just so people are clear, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I think he was a disgrace to his office, and I think it's a struggle to find many good things from his presidency. There are a few recent peace deals in the Middle East, diplomatic overtures. That's very important, and I give Trump administration credit for that. And I suppose as he was the head of the administration, you have to give him credit for that. Um, but I really think in the case of Donald Trump, the bad definitely outweighs the good. Um, this is a man who undermined democracy, pandered to dictators, spent more time trying to sue his rival than actually attending meetings on the worst crisis America has faced in modern times. Um, Recklessly promote conspiracy theories that could go on. But the whole "are you for or against Trump" thing, it's just been rumbling on for months. By virtue of the office, the American presidency will draw international interest, a lot more, say, than the foreign minister of Benin. All due respect to people from Benin. Um, that's just the world we're in. That office is so important, not just for America but for the world. And I think it's naive to say the American president, so it's just only Americans should be interested because America's the most powerful country in the world, the United States of America. Um, Whoever is the head of state of that country is going to have a very important role in the world, whether they're weak or strong or whatever, just by virtue of their office. That's why even mediocre American presidents, forgettable American presidents, are still elevated to a position of world importance. Um, so that's just something to kind of think about. Um, I want to make a little disclaimer before I get into the main point of the video. I've wanted to make this one for a while, and I was kind of reluctant to in some ways because I thought it might detract from the causes that I'm going to be mentioning here, and I don't want to do that because I strongly support the causes. Um, so examples of this are the Milk Tea Alliance. It was a movement led by young people across Asian countries, particularly. I think it began in Thailand, but don't quote me on that. Basically, Thailand, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and other countries in the East Asia, Southeast Asia sphere, who these young people felt that there was encroaching dictatorship or they were opposing dictatorship and they wanted kind of a voice against it. It comes from the different kinds of bubble tea. I understand that found in that part of the world. Now, should probably give another disclaimer here. I was for a time in the group, the Facebook group of Milk Tea Alliance, and I joined because I totally support their principles. And ever since the Hong Kong protests have been going on, I've been absolutely 100% on the side of those who don't want to see Beijing's encroaching power in the territory. But this video isn't so much for a big in-depth look at what's going on in Hong Kong, although that's part of it. It's more about how, in my opinion, some particularly Hong Kong activists have been, I don't want to say misled, but I find it quite frustrating that they've now become so involved in this Trump cult. I think it kind of damages their cause in a way, and that's a big problem because I think it's a very important cause, a very important cause. There's another point here. I don't want to suggest in any way that these people represent the whole. They don't. In fact, I had a few heated debates on that group because what happened was kept seeing these posts which showed those ridiculous Trump memes where Trump was Rocky Balboa, just as an example. By the way, for those who keep posting that, Rocky Balboa was a humble guy. The point is, he was a humble journeyman fighter who rose to the top. He wasn't a brash billionaire who, corrupted his office. It's a nonsense comparison. Anyway, I don't think Trump is even that physically fit. The guy's overweight, so it's a nonsense comparison. Um, that's an example of the cult, the personality cult that's at stake here, that is going on here. I mean, Trump is should be yesterday's news. Biden's been president for a month now, but Trump just keeps coming back like a bad smell. And so long as that's the case, then it needs to be challenged. Um, I always thought, by the way, was potentially a mistake for Democrats to push for a trial because unfortunately that just martyrizes him and he doesn't deserve that. He got cleared, of course. I think the only reason he got cleared, this is my conjecture, but I think a lot of Republicans are scared of offending his base. I think that's the truth. I think they know he'll probably run in 2024. They're scared of offending his base just in case, I guess, if he drops out, they need to pick up that support. Trump still has huge power in his party. There's no question about it. And so a lot of Republicans are scared of that. That's why there were a few like Mitt Romney who put country before party. But anyway, on the issue of China, let's just compare the two men. Let's just cut to the chase about this. Um, I think these people, and there are mostly Hong Kongers, the people I'm talking about, who really push this Trump cult. They say they love Trump, Beijing, Biden. I mean, it was coming thick and fast before the election. Beijing, Biden will sell Hong Kong out. Beijing, Biden, this. And the smear that Joe Biden is a puppet of China is largely baseless. There was supposed to be some question marks over his son. I'm of the view that, his son needs to answer to that. But this smear that Biden will be a puppet of Beijing, I think in part it came from optics because Biden was less vocal in criticizing China. One of the few good things Trump done was change the rhetoric on China. I do think that was important. Although he was an early supporter, I might add, of the Uyghur concentration camps, he changed his stance. As the administration went out, they called it genocide, but he was initially supportive of that. Um, but Trump did have tough rhetoric. He called it the China virus. He blamed China for it. So the optics of that was, look, Trump's tough, therefore his opponents must be weak. Now, I think the Democrats made some mistakes. The Chinese New Year celebrations went ahead in New York City in February last year when it was already known that the virus was spreading. And that was an example of putting, frankly, diversity before public safety. Um, that was a stupid thing to do. And the Democrats should apologize for that, or at least acknowledge that they were partly responsible for its spread. Um, they also kept panning in on this, Trump's a racist thing. I think that's misguided because whilst Trump's rhetoric probably didn't help in xenophobic attacks, um, let's make no mistake, this began in China. And I think the Democrats should have been more vocal in acknowledging that to be the case. But let's look at the actual facts. Biden has consistently taken a tough line on China. There is no evidence that he's a China puppet at all. Um, in fact, Joe Biden was speaking out on human rights long before Donald Trump even thought about getting into office. So, to those Hong Kong people who are praising Trump and denigrating Biden, what do you say to that? Do you really think Donald Trump is a man that's motivated by human rights? I don't. He may have occasionally mentioned it, but I really don't think his guiding principle is on human rights. I'm not saying it should be the only principle of a president, but I think it should be a big one if you're the leader of the free world. Um, could Biden have done more when he was vice president? Perhaps. But remember, foremost, it was Obama who was president. So if you want to criticize the pivot to Asia, um, ultimately it's the president who makes the decisions. Biden probably could have done more. He could have said, Mr. President, should we really be doing this? Can we trust China? Um, But then again, the pivot to Asia wasn't so much about pandering to China, it was about balancing out Pacific power. So there's a lot of misconceptions about this. I do think successive presidents until Trump, let's say really Clinton, Bush 43, Obama, those three presidents, I think took the view that if we kind of encourage China's rise, we have this peaceful coexistence and no just reform naturally. Well, that hasn't happened. Trump did change the rhetoric on that. For that, he deserves credit. But that does not mean that he, therefore, his record's great and Biden's is terrible. And with that in mind, what did Biden actually do about, excuse me, what did Trump actually do about Hong Kong? You know, when they praise Trump, I think, well, okay, what's the one big policy that you could point to? Um, did the State Department allow lots of um, Hong Kong people to have quicker access to the green card, as has happened in the United Kingdom, where the Foreign Office has rushed through legislation to get BNO passport holders to the UK? Maybe the State Department did, so maybe that's explained their love of Trump. But when it actually comes to it, um, there was sanctions at trade level, but were there sanctions on China for human rights? Was there sanctions on Hong Kong officials? Um, if there was, then Trump deserves credit for that, I guess. So does Mike Pompeo. I think Pompeo was a good Secretary of State in terms of standing up to China. Um, but the narrative that Biden is pro-China is a gross smear. In fact, in his first call with Xi Jinping, apparently it was very frosty, and Biden did bring up human rights issues. So clearly, this idea that Biden's is going to be a pandering to Beijing is false. Um, it may be that Biden doesn't come out with the same rhetoric as Trump, but what I'm interested in is not rhetoric, but action. Now, Biden needs to show that he's going to take concrete action on this. I would favor heavy sanctions, not on China, the state, because that always ends up hurting ordinary people, but on Chinese officials. Definitely, put the pressure on and lead from the front. This is another thing Donald Trump did not do. He polarized allies. Joe Biden will lead from the front. He will unite allies. He will unite the Five Eyes. Um, there's just so much mythology put around Trump. It gets really tiresome. But all I would say to those Hong Kongers who keep promoting Trump, there's another important aspect of this. Regardless of Trump's stance on Hong Kong, even if he did do a lot more, and maybe I'm not giving him his due credit. Maybe he does deserve more credit for policy on Hong Kong. Okay, let's say that's the case. That still doesn't condone you actually trying to undermine American democracy. It's pretty hypocritical to say that you're all about Hong Kong democracy and you want to throw off the shackles of the Communist Party. But by the way, we're going to support the conspiracy theories that the Democrats stole the election. So when you're doing that, you're disrespecting 81 million Americans who voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So it's hypocritical. Um, in the end, I actually left the group because I got so tired of it being hijacked, as I saw it, by Trump cultists who don't think objectively. It's just Trump is God and you can't say anything else. And it's pathetic. Um, so I think that that sort of mentality overshadows the movement. A movement like that's supposed to be about opposing the CCP, opposing the Burmese junta, and so on. So when it becomes something else, and I've now seen this on the group British Hong Kong, which is another similar group. But it's more specific to Hong Kong. They're starting to come out with these Trumpian posts. It's polarizing. It's unhelpful. I've seen it before. I've seen other groups that polarize members by starting to advocate a position that wasn't what the group was about. I saw this in a few UK unionist groups where they started making it all about Brexit rather than uniting people who might have voted leave or remain, but uniting them in support for the United Kingdom. It's really frustrating when a group does that. Um, and the admins need to get their act together. consider what they're doing. To be honest, it pisses me off because all it does is polarize people who would be supportive. I'm still supportive of the movement. I'm still supportive of the Milk Tea Alliance, just not that particular direction that the group was going in. For what it's worth, I should say, one member did try her best to get me back. She agreed with me. She said that, those people were stupid and polarizing, and I did get a lot of support for my comments, but it just became too dominant, and the admins weren't really, you know, keeping order of this, saying this is not what the group's about. It's not about Joe Biden or Donald Trump. It's about, what direction Hong Kong is going in and what support America will give. I suppose they would say, well, we think Trump is good for Hong Kong. We think Biden's for Hong Kong, but they haven't actually shown any evidence of it. I haven't seen a single one of these people produce evidence that Biden's a Beijing puppet. They've come out with their little infantile memes, but they haven't actually got any evidence of that, other than the fact that he was part of an administration that, had this pivot to Asia. But again, I think that was more about balancing out power in the Pacific rather than giving China what it wanted. So anyway, that's Joe Biden's president now, whether they like it or not. They have to respect American democracy. But it is right if they now put pressure on Biden and say, um, you're the leader of the free world now, you're the leader of the United States, take action on Hong Kong, take action on the Uyghurs, um, take action regarding China's undermining of democracies around the world, and stand with allies, stand with Britain, stand with Australia, stand with Western Europe, stand with South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. That's something Biden needs to prove. We cannot have business as normal with China, and his administration must vocally say that. And a final point, I'm saying that Biden's been unfairly smeared, and I still believe that. But if Biden does show that he is too weak on China, if he does show that he is giving China too much, then then the critique I think will be fair. But my point was you're condemning the man before he's even entered office. Um, and his record was speaking out on human rights issues long before Trump even got into politics. When Trump was doing business deals with New York real estate, Biden was pushing this stuff. So that's why I think it's such an odious and distorted analogy. I appreciate not everyone will agree with this. I might even attract the ire of some Hong Kong people, um, but you don't speak for everyone. And whilst you have a right to support Donald Trump, you have no right to undermine American democracy whilst saying that you're standing up to the CCP. And a final point, all that does is play straight into the communist regime's hands. Think of the irony of it. It just plays straight into their hands because they say, oh, look how unstable America and the West is. But, you know, when you're involved in a cult, and that's what it is, that's what blind worship of an individual is by definition, then you can't think objectively. So it's unfortunate it went that way. But I know it doesn't represent everyone. I know there's a lot of Hong Kongers who agree with me. And I say to them, take your voice back. Don't let these Trump cultists define your movement because in my opinion, they're damaging the movement.